think of it from a production aspect, because trust me, producers and production companies will love you for that. Hi, I am Jonathan Akkawi, and I am a screenwriter, a script doctor, and a story consultant for Hollywood production studios and independent production companies. So I'm here to talk about half-hour shows. Traditionally, half-hour TV shows are considered comedies, although in this day and age with streaming, it's blurring the lines between drama and comedy, and you have dramedies and whatnot. But back in the day, half-hour comedies used to be what we know as sitcoms, which is a portmanteau, which stands for situational comedy. Sitcoms are known as multi-camera comedies, and there's actually two types of shooting styles for half-hour shows, single-cam and multicam. As the name would make sense, it would be for single cam, you use one camera, multicam, multiple cameras. Multicams emerged because back in the 50s, at the dawn of television, sitcoms were kind of designed to be more like plays. Traditionally, you're thinking of it as how many sets can I have? Usually, maximum in an episode, you want 3 to maybe 5 sets total. 3 sets usually are used throughout the entire TV show ever. So think of like Friends. Friends, we have Central Perk, we have the girls' apartment and the boys' apartment. If you go back and break down an episode, you'll notice that a majority of the episode, probably 70-80%, all the conflict, all the dialogue, all the action takes place in these sets. That's because, again, it's more useful to have a soundstage and you built these sets on them and then have the multiple cameras set up already to go. That way when you do your take, you automatically have all these different angles for use. And so if we go to a script like Frasier, you'll notice here on this script that it kind of also gets broken down by scene, because the way that a play is written is by scenes, the way that film and TV as well, but for plays, you're specifically focused on longer scenes. And so for sitcoms and multicams, that's what you do here. So you denote the scene. Here we have scene A, and then your traditional or your basic descriptive passage, and then your slug line. If you notice in this slug line, you have the, in parentheses, D1. Now that actually denotes day one, because with multicam episodes, they usually will unravel over the course of a day or two, and that's also for a production to understand, okay, how many costume changes do we need, any makeup stuff, wardrobe, all that kind of stuff. And then the biggest difference you'll see here is that dialogue is actually double-spaced. The reason being, for multicam usually has a live studio audience. That's where you hear the laugh track, the ha 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 ha, you know, when a joke gets told and whatnot. But that's also a way to test, is the joke funny that the writers wrote? And if it's not, they'll use what's known as an alt. And sometimes alts will actually be written in the script, or you have the writers offset, kind of coming up with a new joke and whatnot, and then feeding it to the actor if they're doing another take. And so the dialogue is double spaced for that reason. All double spaced, with the action being all caps. And notice, for multicam, it's mostly dialogue with limited action, because again, it's more like a play. Now, for single cams, we use one camera, and so that kind of opens up our world and where we can film and how the TV show can be structured, or the story can be structured. And so, for example, let's go to 30 Rock, the classic NBC show by Tina Fey. Now this show, if you notice, is written in a traditional script format that we normally see, but it's broken out into acts. So we have a cold open, an act 1, an act 2, act 3, and then a tag. And so here we see that we start out with the cold open. Cold open normally kind of sets up the theme of the episode, or what the episode's going to be about with an objective and whatnot. And so if we kind of pay attention and look at the script here, we have our slug line, we have our description, and then dialogue. It kind of sets things up. We have another scene that comes in, because unlike a multicam where we're kind of constricted to space, single cam, like I said, could be multiple places. It could be on a soundstage, it could be exterior, it could be, you know, whatever you want. And so the script kind of will look quite different if you kind of pay attention here. And then here we see that the cold open ends and we have act 1, and we kind of go into the rest of the story. Now, I'm going to talk real quick about the basic screenwriting format. So in case you're like, what is a slug line? Why does he keep saying these words? I'm going to use the script for the pilot episode of Rami. So here, we notice that this here is a slug line. Interior, int, as my friend likes to say, exterior, ext. That is to denote whether the scene is being shot inside or outside. Yes, it's more of a production element, but at the same time, for a writer, you kind of have to always have these kinds of things in mind. So when you come to write your own pilot, you always want to imagine, yes, this is the story I want to tell, but at the same time, think of it from a production aspect. Because trust me, producers and production companies will love you for that. So here, interior, exterior, and then we have, here it says Mimi's bedroom. That's the location. Sometimes you can have a geographical location, because in this case we have it written Cairo, Egypt, but because the pilot does take place in New York and in Cairo, so that's why they denoted that. But normally you don't need to have the geographical location. It could literally just say Mimi's bedroom. Most slug lines will also include the time of day. Literally, day, night, dusk, dawn, evening, whatever. Again, some people like to omit that, but I don't, just because it kind of sets us chronologically to understand where we are in the story. Is this happening in the daytime after a big event happened? Is this happening at night after a long day? And again, it is a production tool as well to understand the lighting. If it's day, we need it to be much brighter. If it's night, that's a whole mess to understand, how do we light at night and stuff like that. So that's your slug line, as we like to call it. And then normally, you always want to set up your scene with a passage of description. Passage, I say, usually if this is the first scene, but sometimes it could literally just be a sentence, because you always want to drop us in understanding where we are as a reader and as an audience in your story. So here, if you notice, the pilot does use quite a few paragraphs. For a beginning writer, I would not suggest that. A producer will probably throw the script away. But again, this, as you see here, kind of sets up not just where we are in the story, but introduces us to characters. And that's a very important tool, right? Because we need to understand who are we playing with in this story. So we have all our characters introduced. We introduce Mimi, who's the grandmother. We introduce Rami himself, the title character. And then we have our first passage of dialogue. Notice Atif, this character here. The character name will always be in the center of the page to make it look clean. And then the dialogue will also be formatted this way. What is this here, you might ask? That's called a parenthetical. A parenthetical is kind of a stage description, kind of taking it from the way that theater used to be, to denote to the actor, this is how you're supposed to say this line, or maybe there's an action that goes with the line that you didn't want to write as a descriptive line. And so that's usually where you put that. Some writers will tell you, never do that. Other writers love to do that. Again, go with your gut and just tell the story you want to tell. And so then we kind of, here we see a whole page of description, because again, he sets up kind of where we are in this play, in the TV show. And more and more and more. And then boom, we have a title card, title of show. That usually goes in if you are in production. If you're writing a pilot, you usually never want to do that. Because if we go back to what I was saying with the cold open, which let's kind of take a look at a half-hour structure real quick. So half hours are normally structured into 3 acts, Act 1, 2, and 3. Before Act 1, you have a cold open, although some like to refer to the cold open as part of Act 1. And at the very end, you have a tag. Some like to refer to it as part of Act 3. So when television emerged, of course, we had commercials, something that's not really a big thing with streaming. And so the acts were designed to kind of be like at the end of the act, that's where the commercial break happens. And so you might think, well, that's just more of a production tool. Why does it matter for me as a writer? Well, because you want your audience to be engaged and following along, right? So at your act breaks, you always want to have some sort of cliffhanger. And so you write up until an act break, right? So in Act 1, it's kind of your setup and exposition. You want to introduce us to the characters that we're going to follow along in the story, at the same time maybe a theme or two, and then have an inciting incident which kind of kicks off the events of the episode. Basically like, what is the objective of your main character? Your plot point 1 here, as you see written out, that's usually the act break or kind of the little mini cliffhanger that you're kind of leaving the audience with before the commercial break. Your Act 2 is the fun and games. That's where you, as I like to say, beat up your character, right? Throw a bunch of obstacles in their way, have them, have difficulties in terms of achieving their objective, because for half-hour comedies, that's where the comedy comes from. Back to the idea of a sitcom, situational comedy, the comedy arises from putting your characters in situations. Your characters should be flawed, and those situations should kind of exploit those flaws. That's where the comedy crux comes from. And so in Act 2, you have all the space in the world. It's usually the biggest act. And you have all the space in the world to just, again, beat your character up, have fun with it. Again, keeping in mind, you need to lead your character towards the objective. Plot point 2 comes after kind of the midpoint of the episode. And that's, again, the cliffhanger that finally is about to get us to our resolution, which is in Act 3. The climax should answer, does the character obtain their objective, yes or no? And then the tag is usually, at least in a half-hour comedy, there will be some sort of running gag in the episode or some sort of joke. In an hour long, which we're not talking about today, but an hour long, usually that's where the cliffhanger would happen that leads you into wanting to tune into the next episode in the following week. If we go back real quick to our 30 Rock episode, again, we'll notice that Tina Fey broke out her episode into cold open. And then we kind of move a little bit forward. We have Act 1 starting on page 3, kind of scroll down a bit more, and then, eventually you'll find Act 2. And then there we go, on page 21, and then eventually you'll find Act 3. If we go back to the Frasier script, again, the multicam one that's kind of spaced out and formatted differently, you won't necessarily see the episode being broken out into acts, but kind of what I was saying with the scenes. And they will still write the episode in mind, having these kind of act breaks in mind, because again, commercials, but you'll notice that it's a bit differently formatted, where you won't necessarily find Act 1s, Act 2s, and yada, yada, yada. And then finally, we go back to Rami, which Rami is actually a streaming show, so the show is usually written in mind without the idea of commercials and act breaks. If you notice from the beginning, nothing. No acts, no nothing. They just kind of like a film script, it's written directly right through. Now, with the writers, when they kind of when they kind of come up with the story, when they're breaking story, as we like to say, they will have that in mind of like leading, because again, it's important to continue to elevate tension and elevate drama and escalate all that kind of stuff, because as an audience, we want to be engaged. We don't want to just have joke. We want to be following along and understanding and rooting for the character to achieve their goal. And so it's one way to do it without the act breaks, because it kind of sometimes does slow down pacing. But again, you want to kind of listen with your gut and understand if you have a production company after you or not. So with streaming, since there aren't any ads, but with kind of this new idea of kind of having to impose ad breaks into these streaming shows, the writers actually still will not write the episodes with this act break in mind. And so that kind of becomes disengaging to the audience, because if you notice, when you watch those shows, sometimes the act break will just happen out of nowhere. Now, that's more of a production element where the production company and the marketers will come in and just kind of be like, well, it's been 10 minutes, we need to add an ad here. So that's kind of why it always feels forced. So screenwriter, the term is pretty general. You're a writer for the screen. A script doctor is actually, as you would assume based on the name, a doctor who comes in for a script. Just kidding, you don't have to go to school and become a medical doctor for it. But a script doctor is someone who gets hired to basically fix a script. Now some people like to synonymously use the word ghostwriter. I don't, because that's not what a ghostwriter technically does. But a script doctor will take a script in, maybe given notes by a studio or a producer or even a writer themselves if they're like, hey, can you doctor this? And tell you, can you please fix character development? Is the plot progressing well? Thematically, I'm not exploring the right things. What can I do to make it better? And your job as a script doctor is to go in on the script and really break it down and honestly destroy it almost, if you need to, just to understand, okay, this is what you need to fix in the script and make it what you want. There are some famous script doctors, actually. The late, great Carrie Fisher herself, Princess Leia, was a script doctor who was hired a lot to kind of fix female characters in a lot of blockbuster Hollywood scripts. But that is a job that I really like to do, because I like to be a story therapist as well, or a story consultant. Story consultants are very similar to script doctors, but they're more hired to just be like, does the story make sense? Not necessarily, is character development strong? Is this landing with the show engine? All that kind of stuff that a script doctor would do. Your job is more just to kind of read and make sure, do the beats add up? Are there beats that are missing? Are there beats that are redundant? That kind of stuff. So in conclusion, I have talked about kind of a quick overview of multicam and single cam comedies, as well as kind of showing you the different ways that scripts are formatted, as well as a quick little breakdown of formatting and story structure. Thank you for watching.